very hard for me to think that the questions raised by Robert, John, Teresa, Teresa's would remain entirely unanswered. And of course, that is difficult because after each intervention, I had lots of things to say. And then I struggled with my own capacity to remember everything. And these are complex questions. But with your permission, I will propose a generic formula that came to my mind during this whole discussion, and the way in which my category of anthropological differences has been subjected to my enormous pleasure and interest, of course, to all sorts of dismemberments and torture and reorganization, which shows how fragile it is and how much difficulties I have to make use of it. But as somebody, and in fact several people said, it's somehow the idea around which everything I try to do now is revolving, and I'm sure will evolve in the future, and therefore I speak to it in a sense. And allow me to say that this is neither artificially clearly Marxist nor exactly Derrida. So I try to be in the third location where I borrow a sense from all others. But the formula I suggest is imitated again. This is a dangerous game I'm playing here, from the famous photo of the feminists in the 60s and above all 70s. You may remember it existed in all countries. The private is political, with all these problems, of course, around this formula. Because we have in our head the Machiavellian motto again in the Prince, where Machiavelli quite simply and normally defines the political or the action of the political man or agent as rising above the level of the private. And so, and therefore also of the everyday life. In a sense, even somebody like Max Weber kept the same idea. I take this liberty when he discussed the question of, which is translated as routinization of charisma, but routinization in German is Veralltäglichung, becoming everyday, returning to the everyday. Now the formula was the private is political. Allow me to generalize this in the form the anthropological is political. So I'm not trying to produce a kind of incorporation or digestion, so to speak, of the political into the anthropological field. I'm trying to understand the reasons why the political is so impure, and why the anthropological, in the sense that I try to describe, is invading continuously the political, is never to be expelled again from our thinking of the political. This being said, allow me to pick up one question or idea from each of the last interventions and very quickly say. So I begin. It's an arbitrary order. Ms. Teresa Volante, thank you so much, and please, question is hello. And please don't apologize for being a lawyer. That makes you so more precise. Now, whether deconstruction, I hope you not to misunderstand your point, automatically or more or less inevitably leads to the rectification or the correction of the political transformation of some discriminations. Of course not. You completely agree on that. is what you want to say. But when you add that from a legal perspective, deconstruction is not entirely useless, because it may entail something like a promise or the opening of a question, I think we are on the same path from this point of view. Now then you come to the issue of recognition, etc. And you are right, I believe, too. I quickly reread in my mind my paper while we were talking, and I asked myself, in the famous dilemma, the dispute between Axel Honneth's point of view, emphasizing recognition, and Nancy Fraser emphasizing distribution and therefore inequalities. Is it the case that I moved towards the first, not and abandoned or forgot the second? I resist this the idea that we have to make this choice. Of course, but I agree that much in my text, another reflected on that, is revolving around issues of identities and identification from inside and from outside. And for that reason, resonates more directly with the language of problematic of recognition than with the problematic equalities. But I believe that in the reference to for liberty, and even above all, if we agree that Marx is very much on that side too, the question of inequalities can never be totally forgotten. And for the very same reason for which I was saying a moment ago that what's his name? Whom I had written this to I insisted on the idea that contemporary insurrections, if we're to call them like that, Arab Spring, even new Napoleons, very strongly combine substantial claims and demand for radical democracy. I would suggest that the insurrections we can observe in the extra world, that's no longer exactly the relevant category, are not really separating issues of recognition and issues of equality and inequality, especially, of course, if they are centered around the issues of race. Which leads me to quickly allude to something in Teresa Funato's extraordinary English. So where did I put Augustina as well? Excuse me, last term, but I remember. Teresa, thank you so much. I mean, for bringing in the Deleuze and therefore forcing the environment and forcing whom I have quoted, and forcing me therefore to say something, if I can, about, dare I say that, my difference with Deleuze, or the reasons why I do not completely endorse and appropriate a Deleuzian point of view, which of course seems to be even more radical than everything I say about the idea, the difference of differences, or complete instability of the category of differences. And therefore, sticking more with Freud, that's not Deleuze, and with Derrida. Now, I think you hit the target, really, when you brought in the idea that in Deleuze and Guattari, the absolute plasticity of differences is directly connected to the adoption of a trans-individual point of view. And therefore, I confess and I admit with you that despite everything I may have put in other places about the importance of this idea of trans-individuality, there's in fact something in my writing, in my text, that seems to continuously take back towards more subjective point of view. You're right. You're right on this, and so I won't resolve the issue now. But this has to do, of course, with the idea. Let me put this very, very quickly, because I quoted that in other places. In superficial reading, I think that the formula that encapsulates the Deleuzian point of view is desire for otherness, in the sense of the desire of becoming other, and therefore the desire of metamorphosis. There are different forms of so which is by definition without boundaries and without rules. And the more it exceeds every form of pre-established individual subjectivity, the more it seems to be fulfilling this absolute desire that for Deleuze and Guattari is the very heart of life itself. So am I ready to go in that direction? Not entirely, because what interests me is the idea of becoming other, which is an idea I find very, very important. And I quoted in other places beautiful passages from a Thousand Plateau. Is not the idea that the subject would lose himself or herself entirely in a kind of absolute or radical metamorphosis, which is phantasmatic in my opinion. Of course, when they derive their examples from Kafka, it's extraordinary. The becoming imperceptible, the becoming beetle, the becoming animal, and all that. But I don't think that you do politics with that entirely. Maybe I'm wrong. Then that leads me to say something quickly. Am I bothering you too much?
No, can I just ask a question?
No, please don't ask any questions. Peter, to Robert. Robert, thank you so much for pointing at the complete ambiguity of the category of nature. I mean, among other things you said, as it works in my text. And here I recognize and acknowledge the virtues of analytical training and method. I don't know if I identify with that, but you certainly may make use, as I perceive you. I even cite the reference to so of these intellectual instruments. So this is absolutely true, and from that point of view, there is a kind of parallelism in my text, where I say that's at the heart of when I said the idea of antinomy arises from the fact that justification or the possibility of a rightful discrimination obstacle to the right are themselves natural or naturalized, which becomes contradictory with the inspiration, the natural rights inspiration of the discourse of equality. That's not the same concept of nature. You're absolutely right. If that is what you wanted to say.
Well, yeah, and so I mean, you yourself point to
yes,
different interpretations.
Then of course, the next question would be, and that we would ask some legal things about Darwinism and so on. The extent to which, should I say, an ideology? Yes, discourse, in any case, that has been dominant in the history of Western bourgeois society, has effectively played continuously or made continuous use of that ambiguity and so has has used nature in heterogeneous meanings within the same discourse. And then finally, if you know me on leaving aside many things important, I wish I could say something about ontology and grammar. But when you said at the beginning that you didn't see any real that a violation of the principle is not a contradiction. And you raised the issue of the distinction between facts and values. I probably belong to a tradition that not only dislikes the idea of the fact versus values dichotomy, but that with the help of heterogeneous references, Hegel is one of them, Nietzsche is one of them, and others you mentioned, continuously tries to not neglect, but to bypass that kind of dilemma. Now, the category that I would like to bring in here, I was wondering whether while you were speaking, is not, of course, the category of law, or the category of rules, or the category of legal principles, as opposed to the practice, the realization. Of course, there can be a contradiction there. The contradiction, the suspicion that there could be a contradiction, begins to emerge when you introduce, and that is more or less what I was trying to do, when you introduce the idea not only that there are violations of transgression of the principle, but that there are systematic violations of transgression of the principles. That is at the heart of many contemporary disputes about institutional racism and so on and so on. Because what the critics are saying is not, look, the principles are contradicted. What they say is the principles are systematically contradicted. And of course, at this point, at this very point, the good old Marxist can enter the pattern and say something like, no wonder if the principles are systematically contradicted, because the principles are nothing other than a discourse which aims at covering and legitimizing these transgressions. So I am satisfied neither with the first nor with the second. And therefore, I need a broader category, if you like, which encompasses somehow both the principle, the enunciation of the principle, and the facts or the counterfactuals. That could be a category of culture. That could be a Wittgensteinian notion, perhaps, of a language game, or which is also a cultural notion in a sense. But I prefer a Foucauldian category of discourse, provided we, of course, hear discourse also not just as a language game, but as a system of institutions which are and practices which are interwoven with the discourse themselves. So I don't know that I don't say that results your that answers your critique, but I just wanted to say that I take the critique very seriously, and if I try to elaborate on that, I go in that direction. So who is missing John? And
David.
So David is not here. I'm not replying to him because he's not here. I will reply to him. Okay, so we don't have. Helena, I think I already said you're yes. I'm trying to make sure I'm not forgetting anybody. So that is John. Okay. So, little John, that's what you said was relatively complicated. But as I said quickly, I am an immediate fan of your your comparison with Berlin, with your introduction of this you're transferring the Berlinian opposition of positive and negative liberty to positive equality and negative equality. Now, that's a very interesting question. It seems to me, and you have a lot to say about
This is the embryo, it's the beginning.
Yes. But I pick up this. And first of all, as in the case of liberty, should we say that positive equality is always defined in the form of negation of the negation? What I have in mind are very specific things. For example, I'm a great admirer of Amartya Sen's writings on inequality and equality. But it seems to me that he is no avowed Hegelian. His positive concept of equality is very much a negation of the negation. The most interesting for me, at least even now, which also has to do with the successive transformations of this Berlin problematic in the form of the new republicanism. So Quentin Skinner and others. Well, the negation of the negation does very much work. But they did their best to explain that precisely against pure liberal view, resurrecting a certain republican position, we should not content ourselves with a negative concept of liberty, but rather adopt a positive one, which of course includes collective and political capacity, not just the protection of some basic rights and liberties. And I have evidently some sympathy for such a point of view, because perhaps I inherited, that's again very French, from the Rousseauist origins, and Marx made with that. I mean, I think that activism, proletarian class struggle in the Marxian sense is very much an exercise of positive liberty in that sense. But the idea that you give me is that there is no immediate concept of political positive liberty in practice, except in the Republican myth. A positive concept arises only from the dialectical double rejection, say, of negative equality and negative liberty. The discovery and recognition that they are both in fact I know that I didn't address it.
Sorry?
I didn't address most.
No, it's the loose ends there, many of them, because they
Okay, my dear friends, I guess we have reached the end of our capacities to speak, to think, and to listen. And I wish to add my own immense gratitude to what you already said. Am I right? It is the victim in the sense of our own
We have still dinner. But thank you very much, Etienne Balibar, for coming here to us and to discuss a whole day. I do not know where you have a force to do it and to reflect into talk without pause, because also in the coffee breaks, in the lunch hours, discussing the whole time, because probably continue to do it. Because
we'll take the recover.
And thank you very much.
Thank you all.